do it right.
Hello and welcome to Life Challenges, better known as a conversation with Dr. David Clayman. The last time we were with you, we were discussing narcissists, and we were talking about all of the negativity. And every time that during the conversation, we kept referring to self-confidence, which made me wonder, how do we gain self-confidence? Is it something that comes natural? Do we have to work at it? How do we get there from here?
Well,
In 3 easy.
first of all, I want to make a distinction between what the perceived self-confidence, the compensatory self-confidence of people like the narcissists. It's
Okay.
not the same kind of confidence, self-confidence. We are brought into this earth as basically tabula rasa, blank slates.
Okay.
We are introduced to this world by a number of forces around us. We know, for instance, that children who have good bonding experiences with their parents, especially their mothers in the beginning, develop a sense of comfort when they cry, they're taken care of. And as a child evolves, even though they don't know how to process the world, there's a certain sense of stability, whatever. Now, this does not mean that people are going to you just have to take care of them when they're, pooping and peeing and
Right.
eating and sleeping. So if everybody realizes we're brought into the world with a series of, I don't want to use the word ape, but we have a series of potentials that sit inside these little bodies that come. And some people are, from the beginning, very, let's say, motor-oriented. A child that gets up and starts crawling at, I don't know, 6 weeks.
Right.
Starting to make, just rocking in the bed and is active and reaches for things early and has visual sensory stuff. The more you stimulate that, the more it becomes a part of them, and it becomes ultimately a strength, a building block. On the other hand, some of us were not given, let's just use singing, for example. I do not believe that everybody in this world is meant to sing.
I totally agree.
Miss Mayfield, our Mrs. Mayfield, we didn't have Ms. back in those days, our elementary school music teacher, we had an operetta every spring. And I was in Pirates of Penzance. We had the Peers of Highest Station, Pirate Guns for British Nation. I remember the words. And I had a, in quotes, solo. I think it lasted 12 seconds, but everybody had a little piece. And I love music. I tried to do it. I would still sing along with, I croak along with oldies, but I can't do it. I was a swimmer. And I'm going to use that as an example of building confidence in a minute. But I have never, ever learned how to do the butterfly, which is the stroke that is very rhythmic, and you have to get a lot of things coordinated. I was a really good freestyler. I was a decent butterflyer, and I was an okay backstroker, but I was pretty good at the freestyle. If my coaches in summer camp, where I learned to swim, had focused on what I couldn't do, I never would have developed the sense of what I could. And they played on my strength, not on what I couldn't do. And so a lot of parents have this image of what their children are supposed to be. Oh, by the way, not only can I not swim, I can't dance. I have no rhythm. No matter how much, I can do chair dancing, which I'm pretty good at. I can bounce in my chair. And so what I really want people to realize is when you're brought in, if you have a propensity, if you have a good ear for music, if you're coordinated and it's easy for you to do certain kind of physical things, people will identify that and they will build on it. Now, then you have to realize that you have to have success in doing these things and have it be reinforced. These are just very simple behavioral kinds of things. So if you're good at sports and you're recognized for that and you do it, the way you build confidence is by stepwise progressing. Swimming a lap. I'm going to use swimming a lot for this thing. There is a speed for competitive swimmers. Back even when I was a kid, each age group had a certain thing. And I, somewhere in my crazy brain, thought that I was supposed to get in the water and be able to swim that speed rather than work my way up to it. And There's a term that we use called successive approximations of terminal behavior.
Good Lord. Say it again.
So you're going to sound smart, okay? Successive approximations of terminal behavior.
All right.
You have a goal. And I can't do things. One of my plagues is I like taking computer software out of the box, putting it in my computer and expecting to be able to use it. I have set goals. I'll go into this a little bit. So what you do is you work. So for me to make one lap when I was a kid, I'm going to use that as an example. I developed a fear of water when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I didn't have a problem with the bathtub, but I went to a day camp, and for some reason I became very uncomfortable. And I was sent away to summer camp. Sent away. My parents sent me to summer camp, and where I came from, going away for 8 weeks every summer is what we did.
Wow.
Yeah, but we had it was a great time. So when I got to Camp Vernonia in Casco, Maine, I was afraid of the water. Petrified. I could go in and piddle-paddle, but I was 7 years old, 6 years old. And the owner of the camp, this is where you begin to find out what becoming successful means. My dad was the camper there, and I think I've mentioned this on the air before. Mm-hmm. And Dave Michelle loved my father and my uncle, but was so happy to have the second generation, and I was it. And he took me over to his porch, his little dock near his house on a lake in Maine. And he took my fear, and he supported me, and he gave me a chance to feel success. So the first time he dropped his hand from my back when I was trying to float, I panicked. Put his hand back and said, and I love this story, and it's true. He said, "I'll never drop you until I know you're ready." So even when you're not born with the innate capabilities, if you're given the right support, the wonderful teachers that I had going through Stanley School, who I've mentioned previously on this show. I keep forgetting we've been on for 25 years.
Yes.
And some people might not have heard this, but Miss Martin, Miss Farrell, Miss Durgan, Mrs. Rich, Miss Waterman, and Miss Clough. I am 76 years old. And when I say those names, I am still filled with gratitude that they found in each of us when we were kids the things that we were strong with, and they built on those. They didn't tell us what we were bad at. They did, but they did it in a way that said, you can do this. So Dave Michelle, just to float on my back. And then one day, I want anybody that's thinking of building self-confidence, I floated. I lay back, and I looked at the sky, and I didn't panic. And when I started to go down, I knew that if I put my little skinny chest up, I could stay up, and I floated. And that was my first building block of success that I can clearly remember in my life, of knowing that I could do things that I never thought I could do. And by the end of the first summer, I was swimming.
So self-confidence in the beginning has got to have a lot of support.
You have to, even if it's innate, an innate talent, you have to have people, your parents, your family. So if you have highly stringent, critical parents who set standards that you can't possibly meet, or when you do meet them, they move them out further, and you never feel good about what you've accomplished, how are you going to find self-confidence? Because it has to be reinforced. Now, there's some danger in that, and I'll get to that in a minute. But so year 2 at camp, I finally passed my 25 laps. I had to swim 20 laps of 25 yards apiece in order to be able to swim out to our big float where we could. That's very important. I did that. And my cousin, who was one of the counselors, encouraged me and was standing on the dock saying, "We know you." I'm not going to get upset. I'm emotional. "I know you can do it." George Labovitz, he's a brilliant man out of BU, doctorate in industrial psychology, just a great guy. I made it. And there was celebration that I made it from people that mattered. And then I started swimming competition.
Once a person gains like that, once you start having stepping stones, Does it continue or can it falter?
Well, first is that we have innate talents that you can just build on and somehow it just comes naturally. Now, those people sometimes have trouble when they fail and they don't live up to expectations.
That's internal expectations.
That's internal or external. That they felt good about what they've done and they turn and their coach or their parents or whatever don't see it as good, and they criticize, and they, after a ball game, the only thing a kid hears about is the strikes he had, not the hits he had. So, when you do this, the first stage is somehow in the beginning, and this is so complicated, like everything we talk about, but these things come together, and you may have hidden talents you don't know about, so we have to keep those in the background. I could have just stopped and been a recreational swimmer. I was fine with that. But I was pretty good at freestyle. And I swam, and they brought me into the team. We didn't even wear Speedos then. We had our big, got in the water, and your bathing suit kind of was a life raft. And they coached me. I had my first meet, and I won my race. I anchored a relay team. And Dave Michelle, my camp director, ran out in the dock and pulled my little skinny body out of the water and hugged me and said, "You're my tiger in the water." Now, imagine an 8-year-old kid having somebody be that happy about swimming. It's just an inter-camp race. But it was my lap that won, and I found out that I was really, really, really good at anchoring relay teams. I was very good at 25-yard sprints. These were kids, we were kids. And I sucked.
At butterfly.
Couldn't swim them. I went to Trinity when I got my water safety instructor, a big day, by the way. Years later, I had a pass that I could not do butterfly. I had trouble diving deep enough to do some of the in-water rescues because I had sinus problems. We found a way around them so I could ultimately get my goal. And the day I got my water safety instructor patch, WSI, wasn't you senior lifesaver, you were an instructor. I went to that cousin and I showed him the patch.
I wonder if people realize the impact they have on other people.
Wonderful question.
I mean, instead of being critical, what are you going to achieve if you give that compliment, if you give that support?
Or if criticism is seen not as a negative and cutting you down, so you have to find, there's a way you can give that criticism and still have it be part of the development of somebody's skills. And I use the swimming because I really was afraid of the water, and I'm not. And when I get in a swimming pool now, I haven't swam in probably 10 years. But I will guarantee you, if I get in a swimming pool, I will swim laps. I will try to swim laps.
My son was petrified of water. There was, even to the tub, and there was no explanation to it. And the best phone call I ever received was when he was at Boy Scout camp, and he called me to tell me that he got his swimming badge, that he swam a mile in order to get that badge. And I will remember that till the day I die because that was so.
And so if you build a success in an area, you can have if you have the right support, you can take what you know in your strength areas and realize you may never be a world-class gymnast or sprinter, but you may be good at some things. You may be great at others, and you may be just okay. But that's okay, because success, the self-confidence says, what I am is good. I don't care that I can't swim butterfly. I don't care that I can't dance, although I was forced to dance at a wedding recently, and it was really scary. Yeah, little 29-year-old cute kid said, "Come on, Uncle David, dance." And I went, "I don't dance." She says, "You will with me." And I moved, and my wife had almost fainted because she's not seen me dance. Long of this is, I had the potential to be a swimmer. I'm going to now go back to a thing that is good. What do you think the number one fear people have? If they're in school, let's just get them to school. What do you think the number one fear that people have?
Now you're talking children in school.
and adults even, what do you think the number one fear they have?
Well, my first thought was failure, but that's too.
Well, some people become successful because they're trying to run away from being failures, and that's a whole psychological thing.
Okay.
But the number one fear that people carry with them, my wife, who was advocating for the cats on the West Side so they wouldn't get killed, had to do something very different from what she usually does
Speech.
in front of city council. My wife does not ask me to step in. I always offer her. And that night she said, will you get up there and say it for me? And I said, no. Go ahead. And she did. And she did fine. And that success of going in there, she may not want to do it again because of some other things, but you can overcome that resistance. She was successful that night. She went in and advocated for something that she really believed, and she was capable. She does it in her job. She gets up in front of people to do presentations to sell furniture, but she doesn't see she has this as a skill.
Right.
So the number one thing that people are afraid of is speaking in front of crowds.
The most impressive thing I've ever seen is Ronald Reagan's daughter, who I was sitting beside. She was to give a speech, and the time came, and she's been very chatty. The time came, she wrote down 5 words on a piece of paper, 5 words, and she stood up and she gave the best speech I ever heard based on those 5 words.
And I learned to do that. Mr. Penny, do you think, I'm a pretty chatty Kathy,
Yes, you are.
and I know I'm a really, really good public speaker.
Right.
I'm as good as anybody in the nation.
And I have heard you many times.
Yeah. I know how to work an audience. I know, I practice, so I have confidence when I go in there. I do the same. I take an index card and I just put keywords. That's all I do, and I can do 3 hours.
I tried that one time, failed terribly.
Well, it didn't work.
I learned the hard way because I felt I creeped out of that experience.
But you learned.
I learned.
And you build on your successes. Now, there's a fear. People sometimes become good at what they do, appearing to be confident, when they're compensating for fear of failing. And that's an unhealthy way of looking at being self-confident, because you're really not. You're masking insecurities.
But I always felt the more nervous I was, the better I would
That's
do.
called preparatory or anticipatory anxiety. It's a good thing. I'm giving a talk the end of this week. I forgot. I got to get the slides in tomorrow for 60 people. I have looked a little bit of stuff up online. I'm going to give the talk because I know I can. I have a very set way I do it. And you practice and you get better. And you find self-confidence does not have to be being blustery. It's internal. This is my view, and I think it's held up. It's an internalized sense that you're not always looking for people for approval or whatever. You understand yourself. You're happy with who you are. You know where your strengths are. You accept where you're not so good. I don't call them weaknesses. I'm just not good at a lot of stuff.
Right.
I'm not an artist. My sister, so we have 6 kids. Me as a psychologist. I was born to be a psychologist. I know that. For whatever my developmental sequence, when I found psychology, my life has been absolutely effing wonderful since I decided to be a psychologist. Since 1970, when I left Trinity and I went to graduate school. It's been wonderful. My sister Betty spent 47 years or so, National Geographic. She, from the beginning of her life, with calligraphy, her handwriting was wonderful. She can look at a typeface and tell you who originated it.
Wow.
And she's right now designing a logo for a police department in the DC area. And it's wonderful to watch. And and I did some of that. She and I shared a graphic sense. I can be graphic. My sister Vara, who used to be Barbara, is just this creative. She's interesting, but she's done things that we never would have imagined.
So they have found their niche.
Each one in my family. Robert, lawyer, never barred, but great at organizational stuff, and a super advocate and just a compassionate human being. I don't talk about my brother Philip, who has unbelievable talents. He owned a construction company. He built one of the best barns ever on Cape Cod. Now here I'm talking, ever. ever, all of us, ever. My sister, Queen Elizabeth, carried things home from the United States that my sister developed for National Geographic. My sister is just wonderful that way. Vara is creative and funny. Robert is a compassionate person. He was an Olympic level rifleman. And he decided not to go to the U.S. Olympic team, not even try. Philip was a construction person, but he has some other things that were not strengths and allowed him down. And then Daniel, my brother, the artist, who was the most spectacularly multiple talented person in the world.
So they made decisions, like your brother that didn't go to the rifle team, didn't go to the Olympics, was satisfied with where he was, did not feel that he had to prove otherwise, or did not feel that no matter what he had to. But what about when we talked about the person who's intimidated so easily? The person who is, like the last program we did, the narcissist that just put the person down, and the person loses that self-confidence and doesn't stand up for themselves. Can you gain it back after a certain age? You're talking about youth and developing careers as young.
Well, let me give you an example. I won't use her name because she'd die if I used her name, but there was a lady, I think I mentioned her on here, who worked for Union Carbide. And she worked her way up. Her dad was Union Carbide in the plant and would move up his levels. But you worked for Carbide for 40 years, you got your pension, and you left. And
Right.
That was the goal. The family had no risk takers. And this is another, there's so many aspects of this. Being a therapist, this is what I did. So I really love this stuff. So what happens is that this lady worked up, and she got to the highest end of being an administrative professional, secretary kind of thing, and she got bored. She was one of the first people that you learned how to use home computers. She was just really, really bright, just a wonderful human being. And one day she said, I'm not happy with this. I'm a G, whatever the level was. I can't go any higher. And she went home and told her father she was thinking of looking for a new job within Carbide. And he said, you can't do that. You'll fall flat on your face. That's not what we do.
Oh.
So I worked with her. And there's two sides of my working with people, and I'll give you in a second. I worked with her, and she ended up doing some wonderful stuff. She ended up being in the division that, before we had computers, was tracking where all the tankers were in the world. And she was organizing things. And
So she achieved the goal.
she achieved her goal and grew. Because when you become self-confident, you grow, and it's not becoming super important. But in a sense, she relied on me.
How? How did she, as a secretary at Union Carbide, and she wants to go further, how did she decide to call a David Kleeman?
She was depressed.
So her position depressed her.
Her state of mind became such that she wasn't happy because she was a very positive person. She'd never had anybody in that role. I'm dealing with being 76 years old. My dad died at 50. I'm not sure how well I'm going to be a success with self-confidence when I retire. It continues to follow us. You were a wonderful community relations person. You built a practice for people in the area. You had skills that once you found them, you grew. And you had confidence when you were on the air with the parades, when you were doing all the things that you have done in your life. It exuded a sense that I belong here. I'm fine. Now, you might have been nervous in the background, but that's okay.
It's all a gamble.
Well,
But it was a gamble.
and you learn, having a little bit of self-doubt is healthy because it keeps you honest. Having a lot of self-doubt is immobilizing.
Okay.
So a little bit of self-doubt. I still, with every report I do, Sharon, every report, I am back in 8th grade with Miss Norling that I hated, fearing that she was going to find the errors in my essays.
I find that I am extremely impressed with the fact that the secretary who was depressed knew,
She didn't know. She just was depressed.
but she knew to call you. She knew to find help. Let's put it, whether it was a David Kleeman or somebody else.
She ended up in my office, yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so and she came for other reasons, but as I got to know her, her real self was being held back, and the whole women's movement, all the stuff of giving people a chance and working to have them go through school and find paths for yourself. And we chose majors in college. It was hopefully going to be in an area. Sharon, you could give me the answers to a math test, and I'll have trouble copying them down on a piece of paper. Excuse me for the word, but I suck at math.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
I can relate to
terrible.
that totally. Yes.
But I can conceptualize. I can do, and I know this. This is what I'm good at. I'm generally not a good sustainer. You give me 3 or 4. You let me start stuff up. I'm wonderful at that. Conceptualizing, putting that. Put me in the startup stages of something so I can bring it to life, and then I get bored. I got to go on, or I don't like it and I screw up, or I have.
You and Elon Musk.
Yeah, or I have trouble with authority, or you have to know yourself. You have to know yourself, and you have to be comfortable with what you are. Is okay. That's a start. That's just all we have.
That's interesting, knowing what you really want, what you don't want, what makes you happy.
And what you don't have to be apologetic, because I've got friends that can do things that just mystify me. Playing golf has like been the biggest challenge to my self-confidence in my life. I still suck. And I was in a tournament. The guy I play with is a really good golfer, and I'm not. I was the worst gross score in a golf tournament.
But you enjoy the game.
But it doesn't impact my self-confidence as a general rule. It still impacts me when I go on a golf course. If I had to swim butterfly, it would still impact me. But I've now said I am happy with where I am, and I'm using those terms. But with that secretary, the successive approximations of terminal behavior. The first thing you do is you sit there and say, what is it I really want? So you work to clarify that. Or what are the things that I may want? Multiple. You work to assess your skills and understand that if you don't have them, can you develop them? If you can't, then maybe that's not a good job fit. And you learn in a healthy way to take things on. I got a letter last year from a woman I saw in 1983. 1983, she was a school teacher. She's now working on the border in Texas, taking immigrant kids. But she wrote to me on the day that she got her master's in counseling and said, we talked about that in 1983.
Oh, I see. She talked about it in 83, but she achieved it.
And she wrote to me and said, thank you.
So your achievement doesn't have to be in 24 hours.
I can't do software in 24 hours. I can't write a
No
report.
human can do software in 24
I
hours.
can't write a report. Now it's taking me longer because I'm older. But I write long reports, and I can't get them done in 5 hours. It takes me 10 to 15 hours. I can't, and I think I made a plan last week. I had to get 4 referral things done. I set my goals. And to be successful and feel good about myself in one of those goals, I've got 2 of them done.
On that note, we close, but it's been very
We'll start it,
interesting.
we'll pick this up.
I want to know how I know if I'm depressed. On behalf of Dr. Clayman, I'm Sharon King, thanking you for watching the Library Television Network. Till next time, bye-bye.